I'm here with Dr. Catherine Green, who's chairman of the Leadership Development Program with the APAO. And she's also a glaucoma specialist, as well as a member of the Women in Ophthalmology. She joins us here today to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. And you just gave a talk about this during a Women's in Ophthalmology lunch. Could you just tell us a little bit more about why this is so important?
Well, first of all, the lunch was an important first step because the Women in Ophthalmology group has not really had an opportunity for women to get together and network and discuss issues pertaining to women in ophthalmology. So this was the first occasion that a formal function had been arranged. So it was a chance for people to get together and have some lunch, and also we had a couple of speakers talking about issues relevant to women in ophthalmology that are not related to the scientific program. So my topic was to talk about diversity and why it's so important. And it is largely a gender issue, but it's not just a gender issue. We know that diverse organisations perform better. Companies with diverse boards are more productive and more profitable, and workplaces are happier. So having a range of ideas and proper representation of everybody is better for everyone.
That's fascinating. You know, during another talk in this series, a female ophthalmologist from India noted that she actually experienced more gender discrimination in the corporate world than when she was in her clinical life in India, despite that it was a global company. And so I think you've maybe hit the nail on the head in terms of this topic still needing to come to the forefront. What are ways that can happen?
The first is to start having the conversation, and it's contextual and it is culturally driven as well. So how diversity and gender are viewed in different cultures is quite diverse as well. And within organisations, their cultures. So you talked about the culture in a business versus the culture in a healthcare organisation. They might be completely different things because people's goals are different and therefore attract differently motivated people.
Yeah.
But I think the recognition that diversity is important and then working out ways of achieving that is the way to go. And the first thing is to recognise the importance of it.
Your colleagues mentioned that you have some really interesting statistics about this as well. Have you run across certain statistics which basically show that there are still things that need to be addressed in terms of equality in the workplace?
Certainly. The first statistic that springs to mind is that in any decision-making body or group, the tipping point where the diversity thing becomes less of an issue is when there's 35% of women represented. Now, this magic number it seems to be the tipping point where conversations change and it's normal to be a participant female. This is related to a concept called collective intelligence, where the sum of the intelligence of a group is not just a sum of the parts, but it's related to how conversations take place and how decisions are made. And having more women in a group changes the conversation. There's more listening and interaction, and there's also just more collective sharing. And that seems to be a positive thing in improving the collective intelligence of a particular group.
That's interesting. Well, race is also an important issue when it comes to the workplace, and certainly in Asia Pacific, there are many ethnicities around the region. So is that also a factor, or how do you compare one's ethnicity to being a woman in terms of things that impact the workplace environment?
They all add up, and certainly if you're a minority in a group that's a majority, you will have a different place in that group and have a different voice. So it's complex and very difficult to tease out.
Fascinating. Now, when you look at Asia Pacific, how is the region doing in terms of developing equality compared to Western nations?
I think that depends on how you define equality. I think there's diversity, but I think across the board it is very clear that women are underrepresented in any leadership roles in ophthalmology. In my own organisation, RANSCO, we have about 25 20 to 25% of ophthalmologists are female, about 35% of trainees are female. But when I looked at the statistics of committees, it was significantly lower than that, so less than 10% of people in leadership roles were female.
And again, your colleagues have mentioned that more female ophthalmologists are coming up through the ranks, but that very notion that one of your associates mentioned that in Hong Kong there are no department heads that are female.
Yes.
What's happening there?
Again, it's multifactorial. So it's called the Leaky Pipeline.
Okay.
And there are obvious barriers and there are hidden barriers that prevent women from being able to progress as they may wish.
Interesting. What would be an example of an obvious barrier versus a hidden barrier?
An obvious barrier would be people just not asking women if they'd be interested in participating.
Yeah.
Saying, another example, so-and-so might be good to join this committee, but she's busy, she's got 2 young children, so she's probably not interested.
Yeah. Sort of assuming.
Yes.
Yeah. And a hidden barrier?
A hidden barrier is intrinsic and implicit bias. So systems that are designed by men for men, and the example of that is that medical training 100 years ago was male-dominated, so the whole system is geared for men. So all the systems which we are tried and tested and are almost considered a universal truth might not be as adaptable for women who have other demands in their lives, including, as you mentioned in the previous interview, childbearing and child caring roles.
Sure. So assumptions which may not be valid in a rigged system, when you combine those together, it does put up a lot of barriers.
And there's also the concept of a lifetime of advantage versus disadvantage. An example I can give you is from Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, where he describes how elite basketball players in the US have a birth date within a very set window because they're older in their cohort, so they are likely to be more agile and therefore selected for coaching and training, and it's cumulative over a lifetime that you have that advantage, which and the gap continues to grow. And I've started to think of women in medicine and other leadership type roles as it starts from a very long way back, and it's then hard to catch up on that very big gap.
So it'd be interesting to think about that those facts from Outliers and apply it to what's happening with the department heads.
Yeah.
Why are they not
Correct.
Women? So interesting things to think about here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you.
for this segment. We appreciate your statistics and
Thanks
your
very
time.
much. Thank you.
Cheers.